A sobering report today from Canada's budget watchdog. Yves Giroux crunched the numbers behind the federal government's $4.5 billion purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. And he found Ottawa may have overpaid for the project by as much as $1 billion. Not only that, but his report shows the pipeline will lose value if construction doesn't go ahead on schedule. According to the PBO, Trans Mountain is worth $700 million less after a one-year delay. And if the project is never built, the government's purchase is worth as little as $1.8 billion, which would mean a loss of more than $2 billion taxpayer dollars. To talk about all of this, I'm joined from the House of Commons foyer by Joel Lightbound, Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Matt Jenroux is the Conservative Infrastructure Critic, and Murray Rankin is NDP Deputy House Leader. Hi to all three of you. Great to see you. Thanks for making time for us.
You bet.
Mr. Lightbound, I'll start with you. I definitely want to ask you about the question of whether or not the government overpaid for this pipeline. But first, I want to ask you about something Minister Bill Morneau said today. He started saying the cost of the pipeline was $4.1 billion when your government has always said it was $4.5 billion. What changed?
Well, basically, when you look at the PBO's report, first he said that he estimates the price or the value to be between 3.6 and 4.6 billion. We paid 4.4, but considering the capital gains taxes that Kinder Morgan paid, the net cost to Canadians is $4.1 billion. So it's squarely in the middle of the estimates of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report. And furthermore, the PBO's report today fails to take into account certain assets that were purchased in that transaction, for instance, terminals and the budget sound pipeline.
But what Minister Morneau said today was that he had never said it was $4.5 billion, where in the announcement the day the pipeline was bought, your government said $4.5 billion. In the press release that day, you always said $4.5 billion.
Yes, but the net cost, considering the capital gains taxes paid by the company, comes to $4.1 billion, which is, as I said, squarely in the middle of what the PBO
is the language changing so that it looks like you didn't really overpay as much for it?
No, it's just the facts of the transaction that we're presenting. It's the net cost comes to $4.1 billion, no matter how you slice it.
Did your government overpay for this pipeline?
I don't think so. I think it's important to remember that this is fundamental to Canada's economy, and the PBO has said it in its report in the sense that while 99% of our oil exports go to the United States, we're missing out on value for Canadians, which we estimate could be up to $15 billion for the Canadian economy because of the difference between the price that we get from the Americans, whereas if we sold more of our oil on the world market with the world prices, we'd get a lot more for the Canadian economy, for the sector, and it would be, we think it's a good commercial project for the Canadian economy.
Mr. Jenroux, does Mr. Lightbound have a point? I mean, the PBO does say that 8,000 jobs at the height of construction will be created. The PBO also says that if it is built and does help close the differential by about $5 per barrel, that GDP would be boosted by $6 billion over 5 years. What alternative did the government have?
Yeah, well, first of all, to follow up on your previous point, it doesn't give you much confidence in the finance minister if the numbers initially are now different under a PBO report. So it leads to some curiosity as to where that initial number comes from, and now we're struggling with the 4.1 number. This is, again, Vashi, this is a pipeline that was in private control until a number of initiatives that this government put in place moved it out of private control. Then the government had to purchase it. They've now, according to the PBO report, have had to pay over $1 billion for it. They paid on the extreme high end of what it's valued at. So, no, I don't agree that this.
But what alternative did they have, really? Like, if you look through the filings, the Kinder Morgan kept coming back, and first they offered less money. The government was going to pay less, then a bit less, then all of a sudden they're like, okay, we'll pay $4.5 billion. I mean, what alternative did they had if they want to get the oil to another market, which I know the Conservatives are supportive of?
Right. It's the PBO even made reference that this is the finance minister essentially went to a used car lot and said, I'll take that price and I'll even overpay for it. So, again, this is all put in place because it was in private hands. If you remember back to 2015, this pipeline was in private hands. The Energy East pipeline was going ahead, Northern Gateway was going ahead, but because of a number of initiatives that this government's put in place,
it's a court decision.
C69, C48, carbon tax, all of these things have pushed this pipeline. Now the government had no choice but to pay for it. Unfortunately, they paid, according to the PBO, $1 billion too much.
They could have paid. Mr. Rankin, as I mentioned, the PBO estimates this would create 8,000 jobs and boost GDP by $6 billion over 5 years. Isn't that a good thing?
It's a bad thing that the government hasn't chosen to prioritize what Canadians want, which is green jobs, a renewable economy, rather than taking the risk of what this project is going to entail. Now, you know, whether they paid $1 billion more or not, the PBO has also said there's more reports to come. There'll be more evaluations. If there's delays, which they acknowledged are likely, the PBO, that's $700 million more a year for a leaky pipeline that is so many years old. I mean, I think the people in Texas, at the headquarters of Kinder Morgan, must be just excited as can be.
Okay, Mr. Lightbound, let me ask you about that. Let me pick up on what Mr. Rankin is saying, because that point that the PBO does make, that if construction is delayed beyond December of 2021, the value of the pipeline will decrease, and it is an extra, you know, it will cost an extra $700 million, the PBO says. Can you guarantee the pipeline will be built on time and that those extra costs won't be accrued?
Well, we're currently going forward with consultations with First Nations and with the environmental assessments, responding to the Court of Appeals judgment. And I will not speculate on the outcome of this process. But we want to move this project the right way. We want to see it move forward. And as the PBO is pointing out, we believe it's a good project for the Canadian economy. And I think Canadians understand that 99% of our oil going at a discount to the Americans is not an acceptable situation. We need to diversify and get the right price for our oil.
But the PBO is saying the value of what your government spent tax dollars on will decrease the longer it takes to get built. Your government is unable to say that it will meet the deadline, as you know you've described in the past, as the PBO said, as the company had, the deadline that was originally set out.
Mm-hmm. But as I've mentioned, we were following with the process to consult with First Nations and make sure we do it in the right way. And it's our ambition to see this project moving forward, because we think it's going to bring a lot of value to the Canadian economy. Mr.
General, do you understand how it would be hard, given what the court has ruled, to predict exactly when this pipeline is going to get built, given that there has to be, you know, adequate and meaningful consultation done?
Well, I'm glad to bring that up, Vashi, because we have yet to see a plan on this. So all we know is that by December 2021 is when it's supposed to be built and in production. But we have yet to see a plan from this government and this Prime Minister on how he's going to get this.
That's not entirely true. I mean, there is a deadline for the marine consultations. That's February 22nd, I believe. And there is no deadline for the Indigenous portion of them. But we know that the governments, both yours and this one, when you were when the Conservatives were in power, got in trouble with the court for not doing that portion of the consultation meaningfully enough.
I'm glad you bring that up, Vashi, because any more delays at this point in time is exactly what the PBO said, that we risk a significant amount of taxpayer dollars being spent on this. We've seen now, you know, it's up to $1 billion of taxpayer money being unnecessarily spent. And just imagine the things that could have gone to. So you talk about environment and marine protection, all of these things, because this government has put in place that scenario, an energy policy that doesn't make it amenable to private sectors building any sort of project.
But are you saying just cut off the Indigenous portion of the consultation? Are you saying they should limit that?
Of course not. No, but again, the PBO said today that any more delays significantly risk us getting any sort of value out of this pipeline. So, you know, we'd encourage the government to come forward with their plan to show exactly how they're going to get this built, and hopefully at the end of the day get this project built. Because me and Mr. Lightbound, of course we want this project built, but we just seen that nothing but delays and unnecessary money going to this project.
Well, Mr. Rankin, it sounds like you who wants to get in there, I think?
Well, I want to get in there because there's another actor that you haven't talked about, which is namely the government of British Columbia, which has a lawsuit against the federal government for this project, which doesn't, the coastal people that I represent in British Columbia are not in favor of the risks that this project entails. Inevitably, there'll be further delays. How many Canadians have seen infrastructure projects of this magnitude come in on time in our lifetime? It's obviously going to be delayed, and you haven't even factored in the litigation costs. It's a case that's currently before the BC Court of Appeal. So there's going to be delays. It's going to cost more, and Canadians need to ask themselves whether this is the right way to spend billions of our dollars when we have a housing crisis and other urgent priorities.
Mr. Lightbound, I'll give you the final word. Do you have an estimate as to how much? Mr. Rankin brings up a good point around the cost of fighting the BC litigation. Do you have any kind of estimate about how much that might add to the whole grand tally?
Well, precisely on the litigation, I don't have the numbers with me, but what I do know is that when we have the right process and we do things the right way, which is what our government is doing, meaningfully consulting with First Nations, there are better chances of seeing this project succeed, while for 10 years the Harper government failed to deliver our resources to foreign markets.
Is better
today 99% of our resources still go to the Americans at a discount, and I think we can strive for more. And
I take your point, but is better chances a good enough barometer for spending, more than $4 billion?
We're confident in the process, and that's why we're following up on what the court has said and engaging meaningfully with First Nations and doing the environmental assessments that we've been mandated to do, and I think that's the way to do it the right way.
Okay, I have to leave it there, but thank you to all three of you. Very much appreciate your time. Thanks to Joel Lightbound, Matt Generou, and Murray Rankin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So sorry, I can do the math for you. 3.6 to 4.6, 4.1. So if you add 3.6 and 4.6 and divide by 2, you get 4.1.
But can you just, where's the 4.1?
The number was 4.1.
When you announced that deal, you told us that it was $4.5 billion purchase. So when did it become 4.1?
No, I didn't. This $4.5 billion investment represents a fair price for Canadians. In fact, the purchase price was $4.5 billion, less the amount of tax advantage, which brings it to $4.1 billion.
What does that mean?
That means we paid $4.1 billion net for the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the expansion.
That's part of the fallout from today's Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on the government's purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. Some confusion over how much the government actually paid for it. As you heard, Finance Minister Bill Morneau says now it was $4.1 billion, though he previously said it was $4.5 billion. Did the government overpay, as the PBO suggests may have been the case? It's time for the Power Panel. In Vancouver, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stockwell Day. Here in studio with me, political commentator Rob Silver, spouse of Katie Telford, Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister, Andrew Thompson, former Saskatchewan Finance Minister and Chief of Government Relations for U of T, and Le Devoir's Marie Vastel. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Marie, I'll start with you. We'll just start on the confusion. I mean, there's lots of questions raised by the PBO report. The government's, Bill Morneau is saying it's 4.1 because they pay a lot of tax on the sale, and so if you subtract the tax that they're paying, it's from the 4.5 figure, it's 4.1, which is right, except for the problem is they did always say it was 4.5, and now as soon as the PBO report comes out, they say it's 4.1.
Yeah, now they're bringing up the fact that the company had to pay capital gain taxes back, which went back to the government, obviously, and so the price went down. But the initial investment was still $4.5 billion, except now this way they can kind of get more in the middle of the bracket of what the PBO says this pipeline was worth or should have been paid, right? If they're at 4.5, they're really on the higher scale of what the PBO says this pipeline is worth or should have been paid. But if they bring it down a little bit, it doesn't seem like they got that much of a bad deal. Mr. Morneau also insisted, or no, not Mr. Morneau, sorry. Some people afterwards, after this scrum, insisted that contrary to what people are saying, the government did negotiate and that this pipeline was actually up for sale for $2 billion more, $6.5 billion. Now they're saying, well, we only paid $4.5 billion. What I did find noteworthy, though, in the PBO's report, is that he does note that if this pipeline gets built, it would open oil to more markets, and it would bring in money, more money to the GDP.
It boosted
$6
by
billion
$6 billion over
a year.
$6 billion over 5 years.
Okay, and which would bring $800 million in taxes a year, which is not unsignificant and which is an incentive for the government to buy this versus a private company. A lot of the opposition MPs are saying, well, no private company wanted this pipeline, and now we see why. You paid way too much money. But I think in the government's defense, they do get money back at the end of it because they are the ones collecting taxes.
Right? If it gets
one day when it gets built.
Stockwell, what do you think the political implications of this report are today? I mean, the debate over whether or not the government should have purchased it and the potential for it getting built has been going on for a long time. Does this add a new layer to it?
It does. The way you ran the newsreels there, which was appropriate, Mr. Morneau saying, I did not say 4.5, and then of course you pop up, it's 4.5. That's always tough on the political side to walk back from that. You know, there's There'll be some accountability for that. It sort of adds to a growing narrative that the federal Liberals are not being straight with the numbers, either because they're just not being straight with them or they don't understand them. And anytime you have the budget officer give you a bit of a slap on the wrist, that's not good. You know, the positive side I see, in terms of selling this, when you're selling your own asset, people will always look at you in terms of, are you telling the truth? When you got the budget officer, Parliamentary Budget Officer, saying this thing will be worth a pile of money in a couple years as long as it doesn't get delayed much more, that's a positive, because you've got a so-called neutral party saying actually this thing's going to increase in value. It also gives the opportunity for instance, the Indigenous Resource Council has 134 First Nations in that council, and the majority of them are for this pipeline. So it gives an opportunity to get that message out against it, that contrary to what maybe gets overly focused on in the media, there's widespread First Nations support for this. And it gives a chance to get, well, of course, there's opposition to everything, but the support for this project among First Nations is significant, very significant. It also gives an opportunity to get out the information in terms of tanker traffic and the incredible developments in tanker traffic that have taken place over the last 10 years. You know, so it's a time to get a message out, and the fact that this would be worth a lot of money, a lot of jobs to Canadians. It would help with our own price of oil, and it would also not have a negative impact on the environment, as some are saying.
With Rob, with the stipulation, I think Stockwell mentioned at some point there that as long as it doesn't get delayed, and that is something that the PBO highlighted too. Like
I'm confused by the framing of this report. This wasn't a criticism of the government. This wasn't a smackdown of the government. The PBO, when I read the 22-page report, gave a range of values that he ascribed to the pipeline, and this was within the pipeline. We can debate whether capital gains taxes that came directly back to the federal government should be netted out of the purchase.
I don't think that's a debate. The debate is whether the minister was being truthful there.
But when you net it out, it's right within.
That's fine. But he's saying that he never said 4.1.
You frame the whole issue, not just you, as that it was a criticism, that they've overpaid for it. That's not what the report actually said. Also, I noted in the report that certain pipeline assets, certain terminal assets were excluded from the evaluation of what the value of the assets were. Never mind the $6 billion of growth to the economy if the pipeline gets built. So it was a fine report, and they're going on with the consultations. Justice Iacobucci is continuing with the consultations of First Nations, and that's the important thing, obviously.
Andrew?
Well, I can't imagine the report's actually helpful. It poses a couple of difficult problems for those who were already saying that it was a creaky old thing that should have been on eBay and didn't have much value in it. Plays to that camp. It brings back, I think, the whole question of what was the point of buying it to start with. It's not like it's made it easier to get the pipeline built by the fact the federal government has it. And so I think it does call into question that whole strategy when we're already going through this process again. And the third piece that I think is going to be a bit of a tougher issue that we're not talking about is there's a lot of speculation they're trying to flip the pipeline, that they are looking for a group of investors who could take it over.
Well, they have been pretty transparent about the fact that eventually they would be selling it.
But now, so what do they sell it at? Do they sell it at 4.1, or do they take the good news in the report and have to sell it at 6.2? Because this is going to change a lot of that equation. So I think it's problematic all around.
I would take exception with your second point, though, Andrew, because the counterfactual, which is the federal government had not stepped in as a purchaser of the project, is this project's dead. Trans Mountain walks away from the project, and we're talking about how there is no project currently on the books that's proceeding. There are no consultations. There's nothing happening. So the policy driver for the federal government to step in here was not as a financial decision. This wasn't Kevin O'Leary taking over the government and trying to make a savvy investment here, whatever it is that Kevin O'Leary would be doing, God forbid, if he ever were running a government. The public policy driver was to enable this project to actually get built. It was obviously the court decision was not anticipated when the purchase was completed, but the counterfactual is there is no project here. So I understand
there are people who don't want.
For some people, Nathan Cullen was talking today. That's a legitimate position. position. And if that is your public policy position, is this pipeline is bad for Canada, then fair enough. It was a bad project yesterday. It was a bad project a month ago. It was a bad project a year ago. If you think it's an important project for Canada, yes, it's important that the federal government protected taxpayer money. Of course, it's important. But the primary driver of this was to get the project built. And that's ultimately what that will be evaluated on the basis.
And they will but people will ask at what cost.
100%, as they should.
Yeah. But I think this is to the point about the camps. If you are against the pipeline, it doesn't matter whether you've spent 4.1 or 4.5. If you're in favor of it, again, money well spent. I think this question will be, now what do you do with it? If it's not driving forward the ability to get it built, if you're not able to sell it back into the private sector at a good return, I think these are the problematic pieces that come forward. Again, I don't think it changes a lot in the politics, but certainly for the chattering classes, it's an issue.
And Marie, when you do look forward to what's next, does it get built? I mean, there are still questions around that. Obviously, I mean, Rob's right. The consultations are ongoing. There's the February 22nd deadline for the marine part of the consultation, but the government has been very careful to say, like, there is no expectation that the Indigenous portion of those consultations will end by X, Y, or Z date.
And they have to, because if they said this project will get built, or if they said it will get built by X date, it would sound like they're jeopardizing the consultation of First Nations by, predetermining the outcome of the consultation. And so they're being very careful. I think in their minds it will get built, but no matter the issue of the consultation with Justice Yakabuchi, even if he gets First Nations to end up being on board, I think the grassroots support for this project will be very difficult, if not impossible, to get. And as you saw on other energy projects, whether it even be in North Dakota, when people don't want something built, it can be very, very hard to get the project off the ground. The government can say yes, the courts can say yes, some First Nations who have deals with the company can say yes, but if you can't get to the construction site, that is a major impairment. Anyway, it's a big problem for the project to go ahead, and I think that's the biggest issue with concerns to delays.
Stockwell, I'll give you the final word on that point.
Every day that this is delayed and every day that pipelines don't get approved in Canada is another day that the world says Canada doesn't care. They've got fabulous resources, they refine them well, they don't want to help other countries reduce their input and their reliability on coal. They're not concerned about reducing emissions, and Canada's a bad place to invest. That's the message that unfortunately will be exacerbated as this goes forward without getting done. Consultation has to happen for sure, and I know these many First Nations that are supportive of it are going to be a part of that and supporting it. But when you're still bringing in oil from Saudi Arabia, a country that apparently the federal Liberals are wanting to pick fights with, and not moving Canadian oil, that's a problem.
Except we're not bringing oil from Saudi Arabia.
But
we're bringing it from other parts that we could
US
contest.
okay,
Well,
not
sure
Saudi
we
Arabia.
are.